So, with the release of Forgotten Realms right around the corner, we're getting into that point in the summer when Magic kind of goes into that transition period from the current standard to that new rotation standard come September. And also, with the release of Forgotten Realms in Arena, we are going to get into our 2022 standard queue, which is going to be definitely a breath of fresh air, I think, for a lot of people who are kind of annoyed at playing the same few decks, especially when it comes to playing the ranked ladder. And yes, sure, there's people who play other decks, but most of the time you're going to go up against like probably like 5 or 6 different decks for the most part, depending on whatever the flavor of the day is, depending on when you do play Arena. But with that being said, hey everyone, Scar TV coming at you with another Magic the Gathering video. In today's video, we dive into some decks I think I'm going to be trying out in the standard 2022 queue to kind of get an idea of, maybe how the queue and meta is going to shape up. With that being said, if you like the video, hit that like button. It definitely helps out a lot. If you're new here, want to know post new videos on the channel, hit that subscribe button. With that being said, let's just dive into the decks and let's just talk about them. So the one thing I will say before I kind of dive into the video, if you kind of got to this part, is that I probably won't do any gameplay just for the most part of these decks, just because I could play them against the current meta and play in the play queue or something like that, but I really don't feel like I'm going to get the true idea of how these decks are going to play out come post-rotation when we get rid of the, everything from Throne of Eldraine all the way up into M21. So, for the most part, I think in today's video, we're just going to be going over the decks I'm kind of figuring out, and you may see that I only have 2s and 3s of certain things, so that's like kind of also figuring out numbers as I kind of play some games and kind of tweak and figure out what I like, what I don't like in the certain decks. So with that being said, I mean, these are the decks that we're going to be over, and the first one is going to be some sort of Dimir Control. I think Dimir Control is poised to be a pretty decent control deck in the meta post rotation as the meta slows down a little bit, because we get rid of some of the annoyance when it comes to some more aggressive aggro decks, but we do kind of go into that balance a little bit. Also have a little bit of a win condition in our top end, as you can kind of see there. We do also play a lot of the foretell things. We're also messing around with a couple of the various new removal spells. We are going to get a couple cards from Forgotten Realms that I probably will tweak in there, as well as I will be playing these decks post that release. So it's one of those things I'm using kind of what general base to go off of, and then I'll probably like tweak and go off of there. But for the most part, this is my Dimir Control deck, and it's pretty straightforward. The deck is playing Professor Onyx as kind of like one of our win conditions, as well as Haka / Alrund, God of the Cosmos, is another card that's interesting in the deck. I'm not really sure if I really like this card. It's interesting in that you can be aggressive in the early game, or even make it as a blocker, which is pretty good. Also, the ability that whenever the bird attacks, it actually scries, which is also pretty coll. But the Alrund, God of the Cosmos, is pretty interesting here because he gets +1/+1 for each card in our hand, and each card we have foretold in our exile. So he's one of those cards that can get very large pretty quickly. They're not +1/+1 counters, but just additional +1/+1. And at the beginning of our end step, we choose a card type, reveal the top 2 cards of our library, put all those cards of the chosen type revealed this way into our hand, and the rest on the bottom of our library in any order. So essentially, he has like a draw mechanic that he kind of fills up our hand if we guess right. So which is definitely pretty good as well. But overall, it's a pretty interesting card that I'm messing around with, kind of seeing how he plays out. Another card that may have seen some play when it first released, but really hasn't seen too much play just because Control is not really, a very prominent deck. And that is Cosma, God of the Voyage, or Omninkeel. It's another interesting card here. Cosmina is actually pretty interesting here because, we're playing that slower game. Her effect of that being of upkeep, we may exile Cosmina whenever a land enters the battlefield control. If it's exiled, you may put a Voyage counter on it. If you don't return it to the battlefield with X +1/+1 counters on it, draw X cards, where X is the amount of Voyage counters on it. So I think Cosmina plus the Alrund could be a decent combo. Also, we need some way to win, and we don't have like things like Shark Typhoon really to kind of pump out Shark tokens. So we kind of need to throw some creatures in the deck that can maybe be aggressive and attack our opponent. But with that being said, let's just go through the deck list and kind of go over some of the cards I have in here, kind of talk about it. So we have 2 Bloodchief's Thirst. I do think this is going to be probably a very strong removal spell. It is sorcery speed, so that's why it's only a 2 of, but I do think this is probably one you probably want 4 copies of, just because for 1 mana, you can remove target creature or planeswalker with mana value 2 or less. Pay the additional 3 mana, you can remove any creature or planeswalker as long as it was kicked. Then we also have Flunked, which is another interesting one here, because like aggro decks usually typically just empty their hand out as quickly as possible. Flunk can be pretty decent as long as your opponent doesn't keep cards in their hand. So yet again, depending on how aggressive the meta is post rotation or in the standard 2022 queue, this could be a pretty decent removal card just because of its ability, to -X/-X instead of actually destroy. It gets around maybe any sort of effect that your opponent may try to do with indestructibility, which is also very good. Like I said, I already went over Cosmina. The Omni Keel is kind of interesting here. If we do get a creature out besides it, we can always crew it. But for the most part, we're really playing the Cosmo side for the most part, just because that's the way we're going to hopefully draw a decent amount of cards and also get a pretty decent size, boat god creature person thing. We got Solid Common, of course, because we are playing Dimir, so we are going to, play some counter spells just to kind of disrupt our opponent's early game or set up for the late game. Pelika Predation is another good card here, just because I don't really know where the meta is going. Are we playing some decks that have big spells? Are we playing decks that are probably smaller and weaker? But the Pelika Predation is pretty interesting here, just because you can be played as a land or you can play it as a can-take kind of card. So, has that versatility, so it's something that we're going to include in the deck for the first, round of playing around with it. Then we also got Poison the Cup. This is a card that I feel like could be a decent removal spell, as you can foretell it. It is a little bit expensive if you don't foretell it, but I do like the idea of getting some scries, because scries are very good in these style of decks. And because we are losing some of our things that kind of scry the top of our library, this is another good card to have. Plus, you can always set up for removal later in the game if you need to. Plus, it kind of synergizes well with our all-run of the God of Cosmos. It wouldn't be a control deck if we weren't drawing cards, so we got Behold the Multiverse. It's very strong. Draw 2, scry 2, then draw 2. We can foretell it in the early game, set up for a draw in the late game. It's just a very good overall draw spell that fits very well in any blue deck that is playing this game of just trying to draw cards and draw answers to maybe whatever your opponent's doing. So definitely a good card. Then we got All-Run God of the Cosmos / Haka the Whispering Raven. 2 mana, 2/3 flyer, which could be a good early blocker if opponent's more on the aggressive side. If it deals damage to a player, we turn to our hand and we scry 2, so it's definitely a good way for looking for something we can always scry. But the downfall is we do have to bounce it back to our hand, and then we can always set it up if we want to swing it for 2 damage, bounce it back to our hand, then play the 5 mana and play the All-Run of the God of the Cosmos, which is a card that gets +1/+1 for each card in our hand, and each card we have our foretell that's in exile. And at the beginning of our end step, we get to choose a card type, reveal top 2 cards, put all cards of the chosen type revealed this way into our hand, the rest on the bottom of our library in any order. So definitely a good way to possibly fill our hands up. We do play a lot of spells, so if you say instants or sorceries, there's a good chance we'll probably hit one of those and probably fill our hand up with at least one of them, if not 2. Then we also have Gravenlore. It's a snow instant. It's Scry X, where X is the amount of snow spent to cast a spell, draw 3 cards. Forgot to mention we are a snow deck in the sense that we do play a couple cards that have snow. I think this is one of them. But it's just a very interesting card here. Get a big scry, you get to draw 3 cards at instant speed, maybe at the end of your opponent's turn to fill back up, or maybe you swing it with your all-run God of the Cosmos and you want to get that additional damage. You pay 1, you get maybe 3 cards out of it, so it gets even bigger, which is always very good. Because Extinction Event is gone, we are just playing 2 Shadow's Verdicts. It's probably something that could go up if the meta does call for more aggressive cards. If there's more of a lower cost decks out there. But essentially, we have 2 Shadow's Verdicts, which exiles all creatures and planeswalkers with mana value 3 or less from the battlefield, and all creatures or planeswalkers mana value 3 or less from all graveyards. And because we're not really playing too many creatures, we do have a fair share of cards that probably won't get hit by this, other than Cosmina. But she is usually most part in the early game in our exile, so hopefully she's not around when Shadow's Verdict does go off. But that's okay. The other card we are playing in the deck is Blood on the Snow. It's another snow sorcery that kind of goes with our snow synergy. It's just another board wipe style thing. We don't have to worry about Annex for the most part, so the destroy all creatures is very good. Our opponent goes Planeswalker heavy, we can destroy all Planeswalkers, and we get to return a creature or Planeswalker with mana value X or less from our graveyard. X is the amount of snow that was spent to cast a spell. So there's a possibility we could always spend a decent amount of snow, which is very good, and maybe get back one of our creatures that may have gotten discarded or destroyed earlier in the game, which is always very good. We got Professor Oryx, which I get it, is another great win condition. The Magecraft ability is a very good, pinging our opponent for some, damage while we gain life in the process. Looking at the top 3 cards of our library, choosing one of them, put into our hand, the rest in our graveyard. -3, make our opponent sacrifice a creature with the greatest power among the creatures that player controls. And if we get to the -8, we get to make the player may discard. If they don't, they lose 3 life, and they repeat the process 6 more times. So they either discard 7 cards, or they take 7 times 3 worth of life, which is 21, and they probably lose at that point. All-Run's Epiphany, because I think in control decks, taking some extra turns is always very good. Maybe this is something you can always increase, but we're not really trying to take an extra turn to really set up some big spell. We're just really more so just trying to take some extra turns just to kind of draw some cards, maybe get some more mana out on the battlefield, maybe ping our opponent for a couple more points of damage with our bird tokens. Other than that, I don't think it's a necessity to really set up some giant turn, but it's always good to have just in case. And then we also have Seagate Restoration, which doubles up as a land. It's a good idea to just draw a ton of cards, make us have no maximum hand size if we want to pay the 7 mana. Worst case scenario, we can always play it as a blue mana on the battlefield tapped, or pay 3 life to have it come in the battlefield not tapped. And we are playing, 24 lands, but we do have some of our modal lands in the deck, so we do have a pretty decent amount of lands. I think we turn out to be 28 lands if you count the 2 cards in the deck that are modal lands as well. So 8 snow-covered islands, 8 snow-covered swamps, 4 pathways, and 4 of the ice tunnel. The one thing I will say that really, other than pathways and certain snarls, don't come in all colors. So we are limited on dual lands that come into play untapped. So we are playing snow, which is to our benefit, but it's unfortunate that we do have some more tap lanes in the deck, and we don't have lands that come to the battlefield untapped for dual colors. So that's the one drawback with this post rotation. And there's nothing from what I've seen in the Forgotten Realms that really has a dual style of producing 2 different color manas. It seems pretty straight to the mono color, so we'll probably have to wait until see what with Innistrad comes out, if there's going to be any sort of dual land kind of style lands coming out with that. But that being said, this is my Dimir Control deck. I do think this is going to be one of those decks that the list you see here is probably not going to be the list that will probably exist at some point, as I probably wait until that play queue opens up for the standard 2022 rotation, get some games in, kind of see what people are playing, what I kind of have to tweak and balance based on what is showing up a lot in that current meta. Alright, so the next deck up on the list is a Selesnya Magecraft kind of aggro style deck. I think this is a deck that I feel like I've seen pop up a couple times in the play queue that I played, and it does seem like an interesting deck to probably try out in being the aggressive aggro style deck. And I do think maybe my version is not the version that would probably be the most the greatest version of the deck, but it is a deck that can probably go off pretty decently. Our curve overall isn't too high. We are playing 23 lands in the deck, which is not terrible. For the deck that really the most expensive thing in our deck is 3 mana. We splash green in here because I think post rotation, we lose a lot of our mono white spells that kind of can do some pump at instant speed, and I think green is definitely very good as a replacement. And I do think the one card that definitely helps out the deck to kind of give it a little bit of that extra protection is Snakeskin Veil. I do think this is definitely a very good pump spell. Also, giving a creature hexproof is very good. So if your opponent's trying to target maybe one of our clever Illuminancer or one of our Light Scribes or something like that, we can always get a Snakeskin Veil and then always play it again with a Mavinda, which is definitely very good here. But overall, the deck is pretty straightforward. If you've seen any of the Magecraft decks, there's some of the typical Magecraft spells. Also, we do have things that take advantage of us playing multiple spells in the same turn. So you see the Clarion Spirits, which is definitely very good, which helps us produce tokens, which helps us get a little bit wider on our opponent, and combine that with something like Lean in Light Scribe, making all our creatures get +1/+1 additional whenever we play a spell is definitely very good there. One card I'm testing out in this is the Storm Shambler. It kind of gives any of our creatures a +1/+1 counter on them, that protection of if our opponent just tries to target them with a spell. We get a green insect token even if they do kill that creature, and it's a 1 mana 1/1, which definitely helps us with curve. I think getting a lot of threats on the board pretty quickly with this style of deck, and then hopefully overrunning our opponent with a decent lean on Light Scribe turn with a couple of spells is definitely very good. But overall, the deck, I'll go over each card, just kind of go and talk about each one. So we have the Clever Luminancer, which is a very good solid 1-drop. Sure, it's a 0/1, but if we could +1/+1 counter on it, it becomes a 1/2, which is definitely very good. Plus the additional +2/+2 it gets every time we play a spell is also very good. Then you got the Guiding Voice. It's the card that puts a +1/+1 counter on target creature at sorcery speed. And then we get to Learn, which essentially we do go into our Learn board, which I'll go in at the end. And then we get to refill our hand back up with a spell after playing this spell, which is, I think, a very solid thing for 1 mana. Snakeskin Veil, like I said, is a very strong card in the sense it's a 1 mana instant speed +1/+1 counter target creature we control, and give it hexproof is always very good if our opponent, like I said, tries to directly target one of our creatures with a spell to try to remove it or get it off the field. Giving a creature hexproof is definitely very good protection. Storm Chamber, like I said, it's a 1 mana 1/1, but it gives our creatures with +1/+1 counters that protection of if it becomes a target of a spell our opponent controls. You get a 1/1 green insect creature token, and if worst case scenario, we could always pay 1 mana and tap it and give it more +1/+1 counters, so it could become a decent sized threat if our opponent's not really doing too much to try to remove it itself. So definitely very good there. Clarion Spirit, because whenever we cast 2 spells in a single turn, we get to create a 1/1 white spirit token with flying, so it creates our board become wider, which just lines up with the next card, which is Leonine Light Scribe. It's a 2 mana 2/2 with Magecraft, and copy instant or sorcery spell. Creatures we control get +1/+1 until end of turn, so definitely makes our creatures that much stronger, makes it tougher for our opponent to have to chump block, because there's things that become very large pretty quickly. So definitely a very good card right there. Luminarch Aspirant is another good card here. It's a 2-mana 1/1. At the beginning of our combat, we get to put a +1/+1 counter on target creature we control, which, you know, synergizes very well with our Storm Shambler. We can start dishing out +1/+1 counters to various creatures on our board, which then gives them that additional benefit of, sure, our opponent may remove that creature, but at least, hey, we get an insect out of it to kind of just keep on passing those counters around. Dragon's Guard Elite is another interesting card here. I do think fits very well with this style of deck. It's a 2-mana 2/2, but it has Magecraft. Where we cast our copy and it's our sorcery spell, we have to put a +1/+1 counter on it. And if we have mana to just kind of waste at the end of our turn, we can always pay 6 mana and we get to double the amount of +1/+1 counters on Dragon's Guard Elite. So this thing can become out of hand very, very quickly if our opponent doesn't really have any way to deal with it. But overall, pretty decent card there to kind of fit in with this aggro synergy with like Magecraft and things like that. Then we have Mavinda. It's a 3-mana 2/3 with fly-in. We can pay 0 mana. We get to cast target instant or sorcery card from our graveyard this turn. If that spell doesn't target a creature we control, it costs 8 more to cast this way. If that spell we put in the graveyard, exile instead. Activate only once each turn. So essentially, any of our instant speed pump spells we can always play back. We can always play back a Guided Voice if we want to go learn again. Any of our spells that go into the graveyard, we do have a way to play them again. Then we, of course, I think this is a card that's going to be in any sort of mono white aggro or any white deck that is going to go on the aggro side, and that's Spartan Regiment. It's a 3-mana spell that when it enters the battlefield we get to learn, and then whenever we attack it, to put a +1/+1 counter on target attacking creature and untap it. So essentially it gives our creature, at least one of our creatures, depending on how aggressive we are attacking, vigilance in a way, because it taps and then untaps and it gets a +1/+1 counter out of it. So definitely very good there. And like I said, our mana base is pretty straightforward. We are playing 23 lands, it looks like, so definitely pretty decent lands. We don't really need a lot of lands. 3 mana is probably enough to really play the deck out, but we have 10 plains, 5 forests, 5 of the Arctic tree lines, and 4 of the branch loft or boulder loft pathways. So overall, pretty decent deck that I do think could get some easy wins and quick wins just because of how aggressive it is, trying to finish off our opponent very, very early. You get a very wide board by like turn 4 without your opponent really doing anything to disrupt the board. There's a good chance he may win as long as you keep playing spells and whatnot. Now onto the learn board / wish board. I would say overall the wish board's pretty decent in a way. I do think I want to make one tweak real quick. Alright, so back to the learn board. I just wanted to make one tweak because I kind of realized when I was creating the deck that I didn't add any colorless lessons, and I do think that there's a particular colorless lesson that kind of works with it, and I kind of made some tweaks on what token spells I wanted to put in the deck. But we have the one academic probation. I don't really know if there's certain cards that you're gonna want to call out, but given something the ability to not be able to block the next turn is definitely very good if we're trying to go for that lethal finishing attack. It's definitely a good card to kind of pick out if you're trying to go for a more aggressive attack on the following turn after probably pulling this. Basic Conjuration, we get to look at the top 6 cards of our library. We get to reveal a creature card from among them, put into our hand, put the rest on the bottom of our library in any order. Play a fair amount of creatures in the deck, so looking for a particular creature, maybe you're looking for a Light Scribe, maybe a Vinda could be very good in this situation. Just a way to kind of dig a little bit deeper, gain a little bit of life out of it. Definitely helps us kind of have another play in a way. Containment Breach, just because I'm unsure if artifacts and enchantments may be a big deal and we need a way to remove them. So it's just a good spell to have to kind of just remove it. If the spell's 2 or less, we get a 1/1 black-green pest token, and whenever it dies, we get to gain 1 life. Also, we threw a 1 pest summon in here just for the create 2 1/1 black-green pest token creatures, and when they die, we get to gain some life. But if we get 2 tokens for 3 mana, and then we combine that with like our aggressive board, those pest tokens can get out of hand very quickly if our opponent doesn't deal with them, and getting life out of it is always very good if we want to just use them as chump blockers. Spirit Summoning is just a 1-of in the deck, just a 3/2 creature, which definitely sits well with our creatures as well in the way that it can attack it pretty aggressively, hopefully get some +1/+1 counters, become kind of an aggressive threat that your opponent has to deal with in a way to maybe take some of the threat off of what else we're playing on the field. And then of course we have 2 expanded anatomies, which is very good for this style of deck. Putting +1/+1 counters on our creatures is always very good. And the idea that most of this board here is spells, so it definitely plays very well into our Magecraft and what we're trying to do there. But overall, this is a very interesting Magecraft deck that I do think is pretty solid just with it here without even thinking about any cards from the Forgotten Realms. There may be some cards, depending on what pops out, if it kind of feels like it fits somewhere in here, I could probably squeeze some in. But for the most part, I do like this list. Maybe the Swarm Shambler is the one card that doesn't really work. But overall, the rest of the deck is pretty decent in that sense. Now, the last deck is a deck that I I feel like holds a place in my heart just because I do enjoy the synergies and things like that. And I feel like if you haven't seen it, I've gone over this deck multiple times. I think I've even done some gameplay on the channel, but essentially it's a Witherbloom deck that plays, you know, pest and tries to just, you know, create a bunch of pests and ping our opponent down with some damage, drawing a bunch of cards, playing some lessons and things like that. But overall, the deck is pretty straightforward, and it's a blast to play, especially when it starts going off. So the Witherbloom deck, like I said, is a fun deck to play. It has a lot of good synergies in it, and I think, you know, it's pretty much built out for the most part from Strixhaven, with a few cards that I think are from Kaldheim when it comes to the lands. Other than that, most of the cards in the deck are, you know, all from, you know, Strixhaven. So the deck, like I said, is trying to play, you know, the deck in two ways. We have Witherbloom Apprentice, which is a spell that whenever we cast a spell or copy a spell, opponent loses 1 life, we gain a life, which is definitely very good. We have ways to copy spells in the deck to, you know, draw some cards and lose life in the process. But, you know, it does trigger this Witherbloom Apprentice ability. The other thing we do have that also takes benefit of us, you know, copying spells is the Magecraft ability on Sedgemoor Witch. It also has Ward, which makes our opponent have to pay life if they want to directly target it, which is very good as well, or the spell gets countered. And it has Menace, so it can actually attack in if our opponent doesn't throw a lot of threats on the board. But the idea here is that whenever we copy or cast a spell, we're going to get a pest token out of it, which is definitely very good because a lot of our spells, you know, involve us having to sacrifice stuff in order to kind of, you know, use that particular spell. So, you know, the overall effect here is we're going to, you know, play spells, hopefully get some tokens out of it, then sacrifice those tokens, then get more tokens to play another spell, and just overall our opponent that way. And in the process, hopefully pinging them down for some damage and just pecking them for like little bits of damage here and there to hopefully finish them off. But for the most part, the deck is pretty straightforward in what it's trying to do. You got Eye Twitch here is a 1 mana 1/1, has when it dies you get to learn, but for 1 mana 1/1 is definitely very good there. And we do have a lesson board that we'll go over in a second. Valentine is another good card I think in the deck. Sure, maybe there's not as many things that are going to come back from the graveyard that, you know, you'd want to exile, but the idea here is if our opponent does have a creature that does die, we can pay 2 and get a pest token out of it, which is definitely very good. And it also has Menace and Lifelink, so getting that early damage and early life gain is always very good. In the late game, if we want to, we can always pay the 4 mana and play the other side, which is the Lisette, Dean of the Root. Whenever we gain life, we may pay 1 if we do get a +1/+1 counter on each creature we control, and those creatures gain trample. So if we have a lot of pest tokens, we start getting some life out of it. We can pay 1 additional mana, put +1/+1 counters across all those creatures, and then give them all trample and attack them very aggressively, which is definitely a good way to finish off the game. Then we got Village Rites, which is just a solid card. It's a 1 mana instant spell that we sacrifice a creature. We get to draw 2 cards that helps us fill our hand back up. Combine that with something like Sedgemoor Witch. We sacrifice a pest, and then we get a pest out of it, regardless of us sacrificing it. Hunt for Specimens is another good card here. It's a 2 mana sorcery. Create a 1/1 black-green pest token. But when this creature dies, you gain a life, and then we can learn. So another way to get into our learn board. Get some pests out of it, which then helps us probably to find a card that creates more pests, which is definitely very good there. From the Forbidden is kind of like our big spell in the deck that kind of synergizes with most of our Magecraft in a way, but we get to sacrifice a creature when we do copy this for each creature we sacrifice, and then we draw a card and lose 1 life. Combine that with our Magecraft synergy. Also, this plus this, we can sacrifice, like, let's just say we had 5 tokens out, but we have Sedgemoor Witch, we sacrifice those 5 tokens. We copy this spell 5 more times, and then we get 6 Sedgemoor Witch. We get 6 pest tokens out of playing this spell, which kind of replaces the creatures we are sacrificing. And if we ever draw another one, we're going to create more pests on top of it, which is definitely very good there. Then we got Dina the Soul Steeper, which is kind of like our replacement for Bastion, which was a card from Ikoria, I believe. And essentially, whenever we gain life, each opponent loses 1 life. So it's kind of our way, whenever our pests die, that we're gonna ping our opponent for additional life. And we can always pay 1 and sacrifice another creature, and she can get +X/+0 until end of turn, where X is sacrifice creature's power. For the most part, most of our creatures in the deck aren't very strong, but this ability to just have a sacrifice outlet in case we need it is always very good. We can always eat some pest tokens, you know, ping our opponent, you know, for some life loss, as well as us gaining some life, which is always very good there. We have Tend the Pest as well, which is a 2 mana instant. At the additional cost to cast this spell, we get to sacrifice a creature, and we create X 1/1 green black pest tokens. When this creature dies, we gain X, where X sacrifice creature's power. So, you know, essentially, we, like I said, if there's something our opponent's, you know, targeting with a spell, and we want to maybe take advantage of it, we can always sacrifice a creature in response, get some pest out of it, so our opponent's spell fizzles, we get pest, and then we move on with the game as well. With the Witherbloom Apprentice, like I said, it's just a good synergy card that helps us with our Magecraft and copying spells, or instants of sorceries we do play in the deck, and we gain a life, and our opponent loses a life, which is also very good. Sesmar Witch, like I said before, is a 3/2 menace with 3 that they pay 3 life if they want to target it with a spell. If not, the spell gets countered. And the Magecraft is whenever you cast or copy an instant or sorcery spell, you carry 1 black green pest token, and whenever it attacks, we gain 1 life, or whenever it dies, we gain 1 life. So for the most part, the deck is pretty straightforward. We have Mortality Spear here for a little bit of removal, but the idea here is we're not really trying to, disrupt what our opponent's playing. We're just trying to play our little combo on them, kind of go off, pinging them for life, us drawing a bunch of cards, and hopefully finding more answers to kind of keep on going and kind of win the game that way. But, we do have 2 Mortality Spears in here in case we really just want to destroy target non-land permanent. And we also have 2 Demigoth Woe Eaters, which is 4 mana 7/6. At the beginning of our upkeep, we have to sacrifice a creature. If we sacrifice Woe Eater, each opponent discards a card, we draw a card, and we gain 2 life. So this is a very large creature that can be a very decent chump blocker. We'd sacrifice Pest to it if we want to keep it around and attacking aggressively for 7 damage. Worst case scenario, at the beginning of our upkeep, we always sacrifice it. Each opponent discards a card, we draw a card, and we gain 2 life. So it's definitely very good there. And the mana base is pretty straightforward. We have 10 swamps, 6 of the forest, 4 of the Slitherboar or Darkboar pathways, and 4 of the snarls. So overall, pretty straightforward deck list. Like I said, the deck is a pretty decent spot where it was the last time I played it. And it's gonna be kind of interesting to see where it falls come rotation and kind of seeing, replacing certain cards with certain cards that are newer. How does the deck do? I do think the deck could use a little bit more removal. Maybe Mortality Spirit is in it. Maybe we do play things that that went over it in my Dimir deck in here in the black category, or we play some fight spells. But for the most part, I think the deck is in a decent spot. And when Thursday happens and we get into that 2022 rotation queue, we'll kind of see how the meta kind of shifts and what decks are working, what decks aren't working. So with that being said, I mean, that is kind of like my ideas of what decks I'm looking to play come the 2022 rotation. I mean, if there's anything that stand out to you, if there's a deck that you're kind of looking at, let me know in the comments below. I'm definitely interested to see where you think, what decks may be good, what decks are you looking to play. I do think there's a lot of people who are excited about, playing in a new meta style of Magic. And, playing in a meta style of Magic before, the September sec drops is definitely pretty cool, because I do feel like you'll see some cards that you haven't seen play, even though they may have been released back in Zendikar, but now, because we don't have the Throne of Eldraine, we don't have the Ikoria, we don't have the mono reds, the mono whites, the rogues, the Sultai. I do think there's going to be a lot of cards that are going to see some decent play, and I do think I'll come up with more deck ideas that, minus in those sets, that could be pretty potentially decent decks. So you may see more videos pop up on the channel in the coming days, just because I do feel like I have a couple ideas I'm thinking about, and depending on how quickly I can turn them around, I do have an additional off day after for the holiday, so I may actually produce an additional video because I have some extra time to kind of go into that in between, packing and whatnot for the moves. But with that being said, if you like the video, hit that like button. It definitely helps out a lot. If you're new here, want to post new videos on the channel, hit that subscribe button. It lets you be notified when I post new videos on the channel, especially with Forgotten Realms right around the corner. I'm sure you guys want to see my budget video that will be posted probably the day after Forgotten Realms pops up. But until next time, I'll see you later. Just want to give a special shout out to the channel members. As you see here on the screen, you can also become a channel member yourself if you want to, by either clicking the join button next to the subscribe button down below, or the link in the description. It definitely helps the channel out, and I thank you if you do go ahead and do so. But until next time, I'll see you later.